Even thousands of years after his reign, Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang has left treasures to be discovered in a tomb buried 114 feet underground.
For over 2,000 years, a colossal secret has remained buried beneath the earth. Qin Shi Huang's sealed tomb, the grave of China's first emperor, isn't just a resting place. It's a fortress of fear, a machine of death, and perhaps the darkest monument in human history. Ancient texts spoke of rivers of mercury, lethal traps, and entire palaces hidden underground. No one dared disturb it, until now. What was uncovered is far worse than we imagined. Why did the emperor build a tomb that looked more like a weapon than a grave? And what truths inside were never meant for human eyes? A ruler obsessed with eternity. Qin Shi Huang, the man who would become the first emperor of China, lived in an age of bloodshed. He rose during the Warring States period, a time when rival kingdoms devoured each other in endless cycles of battle and betrayal. By the time he unified the land in 221 BCE, he had forged more than just a nation. He had created a superpower. Yet behind his achievements was an obsession darker than conquest. Qin was terrified of one thing above all: death. The very idea of his life ending filled him with such dread that it shaped everything he did. From his rule to the monumental tomb he demanded be built. His vision for eternity was not allegorical. Qin Shi Huang ruled with an iron hand, forcing unity after a series of harsh but effective reforms. He standardized currency, weights, measures, and even the script to bind his vast empire into a single system. But it was not good at all. They were nervous acts of control. The empire had no space for deviation, as his mind did. Those who went against him were tongue-tied. Knowledge itself was dangerous, but could undermine his authority. The now famous burning of invaluable written works, where hundreds of school works in philosophy and literature perished, keeps the order, not with the intention of obscuring counter-voices. Those rebels with the scholars faced execution or were buried alive and turned into dust with their wisdom. The crown's legacy was one imposed on the world. The word he said became the only truth. This drive for full control became a pattern for him. Even in thinking of the beyond, he had to exert absolute authority there as well. He was extended the pantheon of earthly jurisdiction, only now swelled and surpassing the eternal. It wasn't enough simply to build these structures for the living. His pharaoh-like journey had only just begun. Qin found his way to the center of the tomb's design. As the palace rolled its stony curtains 1,000 feet up the mound, sheathing him in starfire and protecting him against the beginning of the physical decay. Dying would just be a change and a finishing touch for the existing reality in the direction of a threat to their own morale, yet never a threat to his rule. He could not be forgotten, left to a vulnerability, not even in the spirit's realm. He ordered the burial monument to serve as the detailed blueprint for his empire that it was in reality. Palaces, armies, rivers, stars, and even the heavens themselves would be sealed underground where no intruder could reach him. His obsession with immortality transcended architecture. The emperor sent out messengers to different mythical islands, said to be monitored by wise men who knew the secret of life eternal. His ebbing court alchemists conjured out of strange combinations with rare metals and minerals. An example of these is mercury, which Qin believed was divine and would make him immortal. However, consuming it poisoned his body slowly. Ironically, in trying to achieve immortality, he hastened his own death. But the very poison that he entrusted with life would serve as the foundation of the tomb that he envisioned for eternity. Not enough for Qin Shi Huang to be remembered as the very first emperor. He wanted to live forever, in body and soul. His tomb was unlike any other grave. It also reflected his fear, his ambition, and his desire to dominate after death. Walking into his underground world would not be entering a resting place, but rather walking into the mind of a man incapable of letting go of power. His paranoia would ensure that eternity would be guarded not by silence, but by fear. But what happens when an emperor who ruled through fear builds his tomb the same way? The tomb built in blood. The story of Qin Shi Huang's tomb begins not at the end of his reign, but at the very start of his power. At just 13 years old, when most boys were barely beginning to understand the responsibilities of adulthood, Qin ordered the first plans for his burial complex. It would not simply be a grave. It would be the largest underground project in the world, a secret kingdom carved into the earth. From that moment, tens of thousands of lives were chained to a vision they would never see completed. The construction of the tomb lasted for nearly 4 decades. Convicts, peasants, and soldiers captured in war were conscripted into backbreaking labor. Ancient records speak of as many as 700,000 workers forced to dig, haul, carve, and shape the chambers that would eventually hold the emperor's body. They worked under brutal conditions, with starvation, disease, and exhaustion claiming lives by the thousands. Few ever returned home. For many families, a son or father pressed into service for Qin's tomb was as good as dead the day he left. The burial mound itself became a graveyard, swallowing not only stones and treasures, but the very people who built it. The intentionality of the design behind the tomb proved to be as daring as it was terrifying. According to the ancient historian Sima Qian, the underground complex mirrored the empire. In addition to palaces, watchtowers, and government halls, they were all replicated underground, as if the emperor wanted to govern in a shadow world for an eternal time. A painted ceiling, designed to mimic the night sky, stretched above these palaces, stars glittering above the emperor's eternal domain. Beneath them flowed rivers of mercury, arranged to replicate the Yangtze, Yellow, and other great waterways of China. This was not a resting place. This was a cosmic map, a suspended kingdom between heaven and earth, sealed in darkness. The vault is reputedly horrible not only outside by architecture. Legend has it that when the last chamber's ceiling were inscribed, those workers in the know were executed or entombed alive. Others state entire parties of artisans and laborers were locked within the underground halls to rot away as the eternal guardians of the emperor's secret world. To Qin Shi Huang, human lives meant nothing against his obsession with eternity. What mattered in this whole affair was that no detail concerning his underworld would escape. Paranoia had seeped into the very landscape around him. He commanded the making of a clay army somewhere just beyond the main mound.
So these warriors are all life-sized, like real soldiers. Also, they have different facial features.
The terracotta warriors, thousands of life-sized soldiers, all distinct in their faces, armor, and weapons. All meant to protect the emperor in death, as they would have done in life. But if life-sized administered a warning about the cruelty of living, it was the terrors underground, the blood and secrecy of everything. Every stone, every star painter, and every pool of mercury. Yet rumors of rivers of poison and deadly traps weren't just symbolic. Science would later confirm that something lethal truly sleeps beneath the mound. Science confirms the legends. For centuries, Qin Shi Huang's tomb was spoken of in whispers, half legend, half nightmare. Ancient texts claimed that rivers of mercury flowed beneath the burial mound, that hidden palaces glittered with gold and jade, and that elaborate traps waited for anyone bold enough to trespass. For generations, these tales were dismissed as exaggeration, the kind of embellishment that history tends to wrap around powerful figures. But in the last 50 years, science has begun to peel back the layers of myth. What it found proved that the old stories were not only accurate, they may have understated the danger. In the early 1970s, Chinese scientists collected soil samples from the area surrounding the emperor's tomb. The results were astonishing. Mercury levels in the ground were not just high, they were off the charts, hundreds of times higher than what would be considered normal. This was the first tangible confirmation of Sima Qian's account from over 2,000 years earlier, which described rivers and seas of mercury arranged to mirror China's waterways. What had long been dismissed as symbolic suddenly looked horrifyingly real. The emperor had ordered his tomb filled with liquid poison, creating a deadly moat to guard his eternal kingdom. This discovery created a flurry of new investigations, but archaeologists knew they couldn't just dig at any old site. The dangers of collapse, contamination, and destruction of priceless artifacts made it cost-prohibitive. Instead, they turned to non-invasive technology. Ground-penetrating radar sent pulses into the earth, creating ghostly images of what lay below. The scans revealed hollow spaces of enormous size, suggesting vast chambers and tunnels branching out from the central mound. Some of these shapes seemed unnatural, as if designed to confuse or ensnare intruders. Later, as imaging technology advanced, the scientists used drones and 3D mapping to develop ever more detailed models of tomb interiors. What they were able to scan, however, held hints of something far more complex than a burial site. Some chamber layouts looked for all the world as though they might mimic constellations, suggesting that this emperor's underground palace was not an empire in miniature, but a whole replica of the cosmos itself. Qin Shi Huang did not merely wish to rule China, he wanted to rule heaven and earth, even in death. But as much as the new technologies revealed more things, they also deepened the danger. Experts warned that the only time when the tomb's contents could be sealed safely is if they were sealed for 2 millennia in a delicate balance. Once oxygen got into the space, organic materials would start decaying right away, specifically wood, silk, and paint. Even metals could turn to dust once the exposure. One clumsy move, one careless excavation, and the most significant archaeological discovery in history would vanish before anyone had the chance to study it. Modern scientists were not aware of what earlier observers had observed regarding the perils that mercury contained. These vapors are toxic. If there lies a large, invisible pool of this in the chamber and floods it, then it may prove disastrous not only to archaeologists, but the atmosphere around the site. That tomb is not merely a memory of time gone by. It is a chemical hazard sealed under the earth and allows only a miscalculation to be unleashed. But, despite warnings, teams began preparing to enter. What they encountered first was not treasure, but danger, crossing the forbidden threshold. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang was never meant to be opened. Every layer of earth and stone above it was part of a defense system designed to last for millennia. To the emperor, death was another battlefield, and his resting place was a fortress. For modern scientists, breaching it required not only technology, but a kind of reverence. For one wrong step could destroy the greatest archaeological treasure in human history, or unleash dangers no one was prepared for. The operation began in silence, away from public eyes. Teams of engineers, archaeologists, and chemists worked in sealed facilities, testing equipment again and again before they dared bring it near the burial mound. They understood the risks: high mercury levels, structural collapse, even ancient traps that might still be waiting. Every precaution mattered. Protective tents were erected around possible entry points, acting like sterile bubbles. Within them, the air was carefully filtered and monitored for toxins. Nothing entered the bubble without sterilization, not even the smallest drill. They looked more like astronauts than archaeologists in their suits. Each carried oxygen supplies and filtration systems that could protect against fumes on the off chance that any vapors escaped in the beginning. Moves were slow, deliberate, and heavy, as if each step might somehow flick a switch buried in the dust for over 2,000 years. Now, standing in the very doorway of the Emperor's forbidden chamber, the stories of crossbows rigged to fire automatically seemed less far-fetched. It had been drilled down with diamond-tipped drill heads rotating at a measured speed. The ordinary tools would shatter against the ancient stone. Brute force was out of the question. The drills worked slowly, whispering through rock that was sealed the day it was put there. Robotic probes were fed into narrow openings and were equipped with cameras, lights, and sensors. From the safety of the control room above ground, scientists watched as the first flickering images were seen on their monitors. Shadows of vast halls, glimpses of carved walls, and faint reflections of liquid shimmering in the darkness.
Like a natural, probably mineral or come from some plants, but the purple is chemical from chemical reaction, so that kind of artificial.
The sound came then, a distant crack, and the low groan of stone moving under pressure. The slab finally broke, and there was a rush of stale air driving itself out. The witnesses admitted it was sharp and metallic, and it's kind of disturbing, almost like breathing rust mixed with something bitter. 2,000 years after its first exhale, the tomb carried a warning with it. Instruments spiked immediately and detected mercury vapors at dangerous levels. The team froze, knowing they were standing on the edge of both disaster and discovery. The first rooms turned out to be rather noisy. These walls told fading but sobering stories, not humorous or peaceful, but of war with marching armies, burning cities, and captives kneeling in attested submission. Corridors were lined with bronze weapons, many still shining bright, as if forged in the last hour. Some being so well made, having maintained rust at bay for over 2 millennia, illustrated Qin's chrysalis with military strength. Pools of shining mercury reflected the few lights, so that the effect of rivers was flowing through the underground halls. As the old master historian Sima Qian had said, if what was found inside was this disturbing, what did it mean about the man who built it and the message he left for the future? The Emperor's final warning. The more experts studied the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the clearer one truth became. This was not a place of peace. It was a projection of an emperor's mind, one consumed by fear, power, and obsession. Everything about the underground complex, its architecture, its contents, its dangers, spoke to a ruler who refused to let go, even in death.
The tomb was not simply meant to preserve Qin's body. It was meant to continue his rule forever. Archaeologists and historians who examined the chamber layouts noted how deliberately the underground city was arranged. The central palace was flanked by outer courtyards, surrounded by tunnels and false passages. To many, this mirrored the way Qin organized his empire above ground, tightly controlled, with himself at the center, unreachable by ordinary men. Even the painted ceiling designed to mimic the stars suggested that Qin saw his power extending beyond the earth, into the heavens themselves. He did not just want to live forever, he wanted to govern eternity. The proofs found in the tomb became more and more frightening. Pieces of bronze mechanisms spread here and there indicated that crossbows had been set up to fire automatically, or weapons attached to some other firing mechanism, all to give the emperor's grave the character of a death trap. Then, had these weapons worked as intended, the tomb would have been a fortified barrack,
A sudden, quick end to the incursion to anyone other than those authorized to enter within. Accompanied by the rivers of mercury, which formed a poisonous moat around the chambers, the tomb was an instrument built for propulsion holding, after the death of Qin. The history holds and depicts the most gloomy aspect, in fact, the human cost. Skeletons found under the terrace in the complex clearly indicated sacrifice entombment. Some had been buried in a manner that suggested they were purposely buried alive. Probably servants and guards who had been forced to accompany their masters in the long routes through eternity. Others appeared to have even collapsed on their feet, suffocated since the chambers were made airtight. Rumor no longer. Direct proof here that Qin extended his cruelty even this far into the afterlife. For him, the afterlife wasn't a new freedom from his current world, but rather another empire. He would rule it with the same unrelenting grip. But scholars had bitter divisions. There were those on one side who stated that the tomb should never have been excavated. They added that there was the risk of destroying more fragile artifacts because they had survived sealed away from oxygen and light. The great above all warned even of the lurking dangers to human health and the environment, mercury contamination threatening both researchers and the land around them. To these scholars, therefore, the emperor was giving the final command for seals, to seal it, and no further did modern-day society have any right to go. On the other front were those who maintained that the tomb's contents were too important to be ignored. They stated that opening these secrets can change history and allow lost knowledge on ancient engineering, medicine, and governance to be rediscovered. If the terracotta army is viewed as having single-handedly revolutionized our understanding of the early Chinese Empire, what about the things that still lie hidden within its central chambers? For them, the risk was worth taking since such great discoveries happen only once in human history. What is certain is this: the tomb of Qin Shi Huang is more than just an archaeological site. It is a message engraved in stone, sealed in poison. Power can linger after the death, but so can fear, which is potent enough to raise monuments more terrifying than any army. Perhaps the last warning from the emperor is quite clear. Some secrets should never be uncovered. To disturb them is to risk inheriting the paranoia, cruelty, and danger that built them in the first place. What do you think? Was opening Qin Shi Huang's tomb the greatest discovery of our age, or a mistake humanity will regret? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more untold stories, and watch the next video on screen for another hidden truth that will change how you see history.